years ago now, but she writes prolific poems about grief and loss, and they are just so meaningful. I follow her on Instagram, which is mostly how I find her poems, but she has several printed books, so if this strikes a chord with you, then feel free to check her out. When the waves stop rushing toward the shore, when the earth stands still and the stars shine no more, when the color blue forgets the sky, when the mountains fall and the deserts cry, when the sun turns cold and the moon splits in two, that's when I'll stop missing you. So we today are talking about grief as it pertains to the death of a loved one. But I just wanted to pause for a minute and point out that there are many types of losses that we experience throughout our lives. This is just the ones that I came up with off the top of my head when I was making this slide presentation. But many of the things that I'll talk about today, I think, can be extended to other types of grief that we experience. So while these are principles related to death and grief pertaining to death, they can be translated to other places in your life as well. So just kind of starting off with our terminology. So we have kind of two words that we often use interchangeably, but they are a little different from each other. So grief refers to a person's reaction to loss, which is comprised of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that change over time. Mourning is often described as the outward expression of grief. It is often used to determine or describe the period of time after the loss. I always think of Victorian women all dressed in black in their year of mourning. So just quickly wanted to touch on some common myths. So it's a myth that all people grieve in the same predictable way. And we know there's no right or wrong way to grieve, and we'll be spending a lot of time talking about that this morning. The second myth is that healing from grief involves getting over the loss and generally takes a year. I think this myth is perpetuated by Medicare, because hospices are required by Medicare to provide 13 months of bereavement support after a person dies, which is great and wonderful, and I'm glad that it's available, but that doesn't mean that we're stopping grieving after those 13 months, and in fact, for many people, we're just getting started. So everyone is unique and has their own journey. And then lastly, it's better to not think or talk about the pain. And in the moment, that often does feel like the right thing to do. It feels easier. I'm thinking of some of the words that Karen used earlier about kind of sitting with our discomfort. It's really difficult to do. It's a hard ask. But in fact, that's one of the crucial parts of the grieving process, is learning to live with that pain. And we can't do that unless we're experiencing the pain. And so the fact is that avoiding grief can have negative effects. So some factors that impact grief, and I'll just pause for a second and say, I'm going to kind of talk generally about grief, and then we'll have some opportunities where we're talking specifically about spirituality as we kind of move through. But first, I'm just kind of lay the foundation. So the relationship with the deceased, your spouse, your father, your child, could be, this is kind of what we would call that person, who they are to us. This is different from the nature of the relationship. Was it a close, loving relationship? Was there a lot of tension? Did the person live in Alaska and you only saw them once every 10 years and you weren't close, right? So there's the nature of the relationship impacts the way we grieve. And I'll just put a quick caveat to say that does not determine kind of how much you're grieving, the intensity of the pain. We often grieve for people who we haven't seen since childhood. It doesn't mean that you can't grieve for that person or you shouldn't grieve for that person. These are just things that affect the grief. The circumstances of the death. Was it unexpected, an accident? Was it after a very long illness where you were the caregiver? These things impact the death or the grief. Other losses you've experienced. This could be, we're going to talk about this a little bit in a moment, but maybe you had, several deaths within a short period of time. And then your coping skills. This is something that I think we talk about a lot, and you'll see I have a whole section on this. But we are all kind of raised with different coping skills. These might be helpful or unhelpful, kind of the things that we've learned as we've adapted and grown throughout our lives. Sometimes we had great examples in, parents or caregivers or teachers who kind of showed us these helpful ways to cope with difficult times. But for many people, they didn't have those positive examples. So this affects the way we grieve. We can learn new coping skills, which is great, but it takes practice and time, which when you're grieving is really challenging. Your support system. Some people, this seems like a really wonderful and welcoming community here, so I hope that you all are able to support each other in these times of loss and grief. But not everybody has that. Some people are very isolated. Some people, don't have a lot of family ties anymore. It's difficult to grieve in isolation when it's something that feels very isolating to begin with. And then, of course, other stressors. Maybe the person who died was the breadwinner, and now who's going to pay the bills, things like that. This is just to kind of point out that we are whole people. We are not just these little itty-bitty parts. We are comprised of all of these things: our emotions, our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual health. So these are divided into each category. So on the emotional and mental side, fear that another loss will happen soon. This is very common. Crying at unexpected times. Any of you who have experienced a loss might resonate with this. You're in the grocery store and they start playing a song that was meaningful to you and your person, and you start crying over the carrots. Needing to tell the story over and over. And this could be both the story of the loss, how the person died, but it's also the story of their life and wanting to share with others that they're not forgotten, you're still remembering them. Expecting to see or hear the deceased as if nothing has happened. This is tremendously painful. That feeling when you wake up in the morning and you've forgotten that they've passed away. Or, I really want to tell so-and-so this. I can't do that. Very painful. And then absent-mindedness. Some people call this kind of like brain fog. But forgetting appointments, forgetting, somebody's birthday, that kind of thing. The physical side, sleep disturbances are very common. Primarily difficulty falling asleep, but then if you do wake up, difficulty falling back asleep, sometimes disturbing dreams. A lowered resistance to illness. This is true for all types of stress that we experience in our lives, that being stressed makes us more susceptible to illness. And then changes in appetite. Again, could go either way, more appetite, less appetite. And then physical aches. This is something that's commonly misunderstood. I always put a caveat that if you are experiencing physical aches, you always want to go to the doctor, especially if you've been a caregiver. Oftentimes, caregivers are neglecting their own health because they're so devoted to caring for their loved one, which is so loving and selfless, but it's important to take care of yourself too. So while some aches can be explained by grief, we always just want to get it checked out. I will share briefly in a moment about some personal experience with loss, but my sister was experiencing some stomach aches, difficulty, like she would just get these like nausea spells. And she went to the doctor and they gave her medicine, but they just kind of resolved on their own after about a year. And they were related to her grief. Now, was the medicine maybe helpful? Was it good that she got checked out? Of course, we always want to do that. But it's also okay to acknowledge that our bodies are physically affected by grief. So now we'll touch on our spirituality here, and again, in a short time. So some of the kind of symptoms of grief that we see on the spiritual side: a loss of meaning or direction, or a searching for new meaning, questioning one's faith or changes in belief, and then also finding comfort or solace in faith. I will share just two kind of personal experiences. So one of my previous roles was working in pediatric hospice, and that was really a pivotal time in my own faith journey, just of this questioning of like how these children could be suffering. I won't go too much in depth because I don't want to traumatize you all. But I think we can all kind of imagine how painful and difficult that would be to see a child suffering. And I think what was difficult for me is the spiritual bypassing, the saying of like, well, this is all part of God's plan, or things along that line that were well-meaning and may have been helpful to some people, but to me felt very dismissive, both of the family, the child's experience, and of my own struggles of wondering how this could be. How can we have these two things? And then also my nephew passed away about 3 years ago from a fentanyl overdose. And it was obviously very shocking. and surprising, and it was kind of the same thing, like, oh, well, he's in a better place. Well, I wish he was here, right? So this idea of like we're trying to find ways of comforting, we're trying to find ways of offering some loving connection, but it misses the mark. So for some people, that can be comforting, the idea of an afterlife and seeing somebody again. But for others, that might not be comforting at all. And that might be even kind of adding to the distress and kind of creating a barrier between you and that person. So now we're going to talk briefly about 3 grief theories. The thing I love about grief literature is that these are all ways that we can explain our grief experiences rather than the researchers saying, you have to do this in order to be grieving right. We already addressed that. There's no right or wrong way to grieve, right? But sometimes it's helpful to know that you're not alone, that what you're experiencing is common or expected. And it can be reassuring to the grieving person to know that they're kind of okay. Even though you don't feel okay, what you're experiencing is expected and normal. I also think it's helpful as we're thinking kind of about society as a whole, that we have a lot of expectations for people, like a lot of companies give 3 days of bereavement leave. Well, that might be great if you need to attend a funeral, but that's not how the grieving process works. We're not magically better after 3 days or 13 months or 50 years. So what I like about the theories is that it kind of helps other people understand what you as the grieving person might be experiencing. This one is by J. William Worden. He is a grief researcher, and he came up with these kind of 4 tasks of grief or 4 tasks of mourning. These are, some of you might be familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was kind of the front runner in grief and loss, kind of back in the 70s and 80s. Her ideas are good and helpful, but so the researchers kind of taken that as a platform and jumped off and kind of created their own versions of things. So this one takes his 4 tasks and put them in this cute little teardrop and made it into an acronym. So to accept the reality of the loss, to experience the pain of the loss, to adjust to the new reality without the person, and to reinvest in the new reality. So we're adjusting and we're reinvesting. And those are kind of two steps. Now, these things typically happen kind of all at one time. And again, we're not saying that you have to follow some step-by-step. There's no to-do list here. It's just that these help us understand how a grieving process is, or how the grieving person is navigating this process, which is similar to this one, which I love. This is the dual process model of grief. And so you'll see the blue column, and then there's like the darker purple column and the lighter purple column. So the 2 outside areas are loss-oriented and restoration-oriented. And these are kind of the way we naturally exist in the world as grieving people. So on the loss-oriented side, it's the things that are really pertaining to the loss. Sitting in your sadness, journaling, going to a support group, the things that are loss-oriented. The things on the restoration-oriented side are those things that are reinvesting in the new reality. They're things that are kind of the tasks of life that we're continuing to do. And they're things that maybe you're adding. Maybe you're joining a new social club or doing some sort of new event. And what we see is that we naturally vacillate between these 2 things, the loss-oriented and the restoration-oriented. And that over time, we're spending a little less time on the loss-oriented and a little more time on the restoration-oriented, but it never goes away. We're never going to be completely on the restoration-oriented side because that's not how love or grief work. That we're not forgetting the person and we're not, leaving behind the loss. There is still sadness, there is still pain, but we're able to kind of move back and forth across these 2 things more easily over time. Oh, looks like my picture went away for this one. That's okay. This one is, can you guys see it on your screen? It just dripped away? Okay. That's okay. We'll just skip it. Okay. So the secondary loss, this is, I said in the slide about things that affect grief. So some of the losses have happened before the person died. Maybe, they were working and they had to stop working, so you've already kind of made some adjustments to finances or things like that. The thing that I think is important here is that the death doesn't happen in isolation. There is a ripple effect that goes well beyond, the moment that loss happened. And it affects us in many ways, and it affects us differently. We'll each have kind of different experiences. But things like loss of identity, loss of a sense of safety, loss of faith or change in faith, loss of financial stability, those types of things. So I put this here really just to make note of it, that it's not the one loss, right? It's also all of the ripple effects from that loss that affect us. So questions of identity, where do I fit now? Who am I? What are my beliefs now about the world, about my faith, about death? And similarly, questions of safety. Is the world still safe? Can I still be in relationships with people? Will my friends or family stick around to support me? And it's a sense of feeling out of control. And now on to coping. So on the emotional side, some things that can help is feeling your feelings, phoning a friend, joining a support group, mood boosters. So we're kind of holding this kind of a both and. So we want to feel our feelings. We want to experience the pain of the loss. Those things are helpful. But sometimes we have to go to the grocery store, or we have to pick our grandson up from preschool, whatever. So sometimes doing mood boosters, things that can kind of shift us out of those, really distressing feelings, can be helpful. So things like funny videos or upbeat songs. And then on the mental side, reading grief books. There's a bunch. I'm actually doing a series with the library this summer. I did children's grief books in about a week. It's the first Tuesday of the month. I'm doing teen grief books, and then in August I'll be doing some adult grief books, so you can look out on the library website for that. And then journaling, acts of kindness. This research actually comes from studying depression, and that people who engage in acts of kindness are able to kind of boost their level of functioning and kind of bring themselves out of the depressive episode a little bit. And then healthy boundaries. I think boundaries get a little bit of a bad rap because we've kind of swung the pendulum the other way of kind of putting up all these walls, right? But boundaries are really important to protect yourself. I speak a lot about this during the holiday season and all the expectations of going to events and attending family gatherings and all that. And just kind of giving people permission that it's okay to say no. It's okay to say, I'm not up for that right now. And just kind of giving yourself the permission to do that. Some spiritual coping strategies, meditation, prayer, yoga, and breath work have a lot of benefits. I think the breath work in particular is helpful because it's something you can do, like if you're in a situation, like you're at the doctor's office and it kind of sent you in a spiral, or if you hear the song in the grocery store. It's kind of a way of subtly kind of bringing yourself down, grounding yourself without kind of causing a scene. Spending time in nature is very healing. Creating rituals. I absolutely love this because I think it's really beneficial to us in our grieving process. I worked with a little girl whose dad had passed away, and she had a little picture of him, and every night she would go and kiss his picture and say goodnight. That was her ritual. That was her way of continuing to stay connected to her dad, and it was comforting to her that she had an opportunity to do that. This could be, going to visit the gravesite. This could be, celebrating the milestones, birthdays, anniversaries, those kinds of things. And then reading spiritual or religious texts that bring you comfort. On the physical side, that kind of got scooted up a little bit. Bilateral movement. So this is, again, kind of a more modern therapeutic technique. But it's kind of growing in popularity because it's so effective. And the idea is that something about the bilateral movement, which I'll explain in just a moment, interrupts our brain's kind of distressing function mode. So like if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling overwhelmed, doing these things kind of jolt your brain and kind of create enough of a break that you can kind of reset a little bit. It's related to your parasympathetic nervous system. So the first one is walking. It's literally that, because you're moving both sides of your body, bilateral movement, both sides. The other one is tapping, and the one that I love, I see somebody tapping over there, is actually what we call a butterfly. So you kind of crisscross your arms and you're tapping on each side, right? So any form of tapping can be beneficial, but the bilateral movement is the key, that you're moving both sides. Of course, eating healthy food and drinking water is beneficial for our health, especially when we're grieving, though, because we are susceptible to illness, and then making sure you're getting enough sleep, which, again, one of the challenges of grief is that you're likely not sleeping well. And then engaging in hobbies, so things that are kind of helping you enjoy yourself, connecting with others maybe. I really like this diagram. This is support system, kind of the concentric circles. So the first one obviously is me or you. And then when we kind of go out from there, it's the different circles that are around us of our potential support systems. Now, like I said before, some people have a lot of support that they are it's like a built-in support system, right? Maybe they have a large family support, or they live in a neighborhood where people are all supportive of one another. But that certainly is not true for everyone. So what I like about this is that it kind of gives you some other potential options for people who could be supportive. So the first one, the kind of light pink, is family and friends. And then we have neighbors, community, and established support groups. So this could be like, I'm going to give you the list of our support groups at the end, but this could be kind of engaging with those people. And then organizations and institutions, so like here being part of this fellowship. And then the last is health and social care professionals. So this would be like your doctor, if you went to see a therapist, that kind of thing. And what I always say to people, I think I have the next slide here, is that it doesn't really matter in the sense of like, it's okay if your primary support person is like a paid professional, right? The idea here is that you're accessing any support that might be available. And what you want is people who can provide practical support. Maybe you need help getting your kids to soccer practice. People who will listen to your story. People who can provide emotional support. People who can provide spiritual support. This could be peers, or it could be a professional. And then finding other places where you might be able to find supportive people, like playing pickleball or joining a support group. I love this researcher. She is not a grief professional. She does her own type of work on self-compassion. Her name is Dr. Kristin Neff. Neff. She has a whole website. She wrote a book, but she has a lot of practical advice on her website. And the reason I put this on here is because if we think about supporting somebody else, a family member or friend who's grieving, we would offer them so much compassion and grace, right? That we are allowing them time to feel sad, to feel angry, to experience a wide variety of emotions, and maybe to be a long time before they feel like they can re-engage in the community. We're so generous with other people, but we lack that generosity with ourselves. So I love her work because it helps us practice self-compassion, and especially when we're grieving, there's no expectation, there should not be an expectation, that we're just kind of jumping back into life full force. Because that's just not the way that grief works. It's not the way our hearts and our minds and our bodies work. So extending yourself some self-compassion, if it's difficult to get up in the morning, if it's difficult to go to the grocery store, if you don't feel like going to, a birthday party, whatever it is, to extend some self-compassion to yourself and to say, it's okay. I'm gonna just talk briefly about continuing bonds. I did a whole podcast on this with Mary Washington Healthcare, so you can look on the website and find it. The podcasts are very difficult to find, so I don't blame you if you can't find it. But Continuing Bonds, actually, I was thinking of the song that Pat sang for us of Sand and Water. A few of the lines in there really, I think, speak to this idea of continuing bonds. I'll see you in the waves, right? So this is the idea of staying connected to the person who has died well after they're gone. It might be, kind of subtly, like thinking to yourself, oh, my person would have loved this. Or it might be kind of more overt, going out to their favorite restaurant on their birthday. But I think this quote sums it up perfectly. It's from Tuesdays with Morrie. Death ends a life, not a relationship. Because we are still in a relationship with that person, even if it looks different. And then just briefly, kind of when is more help needed? So some considerations, obviously, there's unfortunately a lack of providers in this area. So that's certainly a challenge, especially depending on certain insurances. Do you want to go online or in person? And then should you see a grief counselor or a therapist? But when it's very important, critical to seek extra help outside of just your community would be if you're experiencing suicidal or homicidal thoughts. If you're unable to complete your daily tasks of living, like showering, getting dressed, feeding yourself. If you're experiencing anxiety or depression that is impacting functioning, or if you have a small or no support system. And then moving forward with grief, so finding moments of joy and peace. And I think this is really a critical part in the idea of moving forward. My sister, when my nephew died, said, we're never going to be happy again. And I can certainly understand that sentiment. And it may feel true for her, but that doesn't change the fact that there are still moments of joy and peace. Watching her other kids score a goal in a soccer game, or laughing about something funny that somebody did, right? So even in the midst of tremendous sadness and loss, there are still these little pockets of joy and peace, and we can seek those out. We can look for those. Carrying your loved one with you, this idea of like continuing bonds. Finding supportive and understanding people, creating a meaningful life with the way things are now. Things are never going to go back to the way they were. It's not going to be the same. But are there ways that we can create meaning now? There's a young woman in the community several years ago who died from a brain aneurysm, and every year her parents do a 5K to raise money to support brain aneurysm research, right? So they've created meaning out of her loss. Do they wish that she was still here? Absolutely. They would rather not raise the money and do the 5K. But they've created meaning out of something that was really painful. And then just that time alone does not heal. That is a very common misconception. Well, I'll feel better in a year or 5 years or 10 years. It's not the time that heals. It really takes work, and it takes being able to acknowledge and face this reality, as painful as it is. I'm just going to speak for a moment about how to help somebody else who's grieving. One I love is offering a memory of them if you have something that you remember about them. Grieving people love to hear about their loved one. Offering to listen, just sitting quietly, and then giving them permission to feel whatever they're feeling. What not to say, at least followed by anything. Don't say that. They're in a better place. There's a reason for everything. I know how you feel. No, you don't. And then how to help a griever, some practical support ideas. If I'm grieving, you can send me that pizza. Listening, bringing a meal, offering specific tasks. A lot of times, well-meaning people will say, let me know if you need anything, which is very kind, but very difficult for the grieving people to know how to ask for help. Even when we're not grieving, if somebody says, oh, I'd love to help you with whatever, how hard is it for us to ask for help in those ways? For most of us, it's difficult to ask for help. And even more so when you're grieving, because oftentimes you don't even know what you need, right? It's hard to even think straight. It's hard to know what would be helpful. So offering something specific. I'm going to the grocery store on Tuesday. Can I pick you up some paper towels and paper plates, right? Something where like it would be a tangible support. I'm going to bring dinner by. Would Tuesday or Thursday be better? And I know a lot of communities will do like meal trains and things like that. Those are great. Those are really wonderful ways to help people. And then remembering special days. So if you happen to know, when a person's, the anniversary of the passing is, or a special birthday, those kinds of things, it's so meaningful just to acknowledge those days with the person. You don't have to, do anything elaborate, but just not letting the day go by unnoticed can be really supportive. And then just not pushing people to moving on and not offering advice. I'll just say briefly, we do have a bunch of support groups going, and Pat shared with me that even some communities are doing their own support groups, so that's great. I think wherever people can find support is wonderful. I don't know if any of you work in healthcare, but I am starting a new group for healthcare workers who are kind of touched by this cumulative loss of watching, people pass away. And then I'm also going to be doing a book study starting in August. The book is Understanding Your Grief by Dr. Alan Wolfelt. It's free. You do have to buy your own book, but it's a 10-week book study. So if anybody's interested, I'd love to get you more information. And then just a few helpful resources. Mental Health America Fredericksburg chapter has a great website that has a search tool. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to search for a therapist or counselor online. Usually what people pull up is Psychology Today, which is okay. But this is a list that's specifically for the Fredericksburg area. And it has a filter. You can put in your zip code, your insurance, if you want to see a type of therapist that you want to see. And then even the topic, like do you want to see somebody for grief, for anxiety, whatever. And then what's your grief? I love this. It gives a lot of really helpful information. They have a lot of articles that are free. They do a few paid courses that you can take, but the information is really all there. And so that's helpful too if you know somebody who's grieving. You can kind of maybe read through some things just to kind of brush up on what they might be going through. And then the Dougy Center works for children and families. So if you know somebody who there are children involved, they have a lot of great resources, educational, and then also some activities. Okay, now I'll toss it to you all. I'd love to hear any thoughts, or I think I'm gonna start way in the back and then we'll come over here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for using the mic so that the people who are watching online can also hear your questions.
Thank you. My question is around grief when there's not death, just big loss. Are the coping mechanisms the same? Do they work the same? What kind of things are different?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say generally yes. I think when we think about coping mechanisms or coping skills, they really are kind of general, right? They're to support us through any hard time in our life. So I don't know that they're necessarily different. What I think is really different, and the way I'm interpreting your question is maybe for the loss of a relationship that might not be death, but a different type of loss of a relationship. I think the tricky part there is that there's kind of always that little hope that the person might change or that there might be reconciliation. And that can be helpful and harmful, but I think it just makes it much more complex. And I don't think that there's an easy answer for it. I think that each situation is unique. But I think generally when we're talking about coping, I think we can say that the coping would be similar, but maybe there might be some more boundaries involved. But that the idea of kind of grieving the loss and grieving the relationship, I don't think that those things are tremendously different. Yeah, I think over here there was...
Hello? Okay. So I don't have a question. I just wanted to share. I've talked to you guys before about seeing my brother and my dad when I had a near-death experience. Well, my brother, he was a complicated man. He didn't really fit in today's society. He loved nature. He loved being out in nature. He loved being alone. And he also had some mental health issues. He had bipolar disorder and would self-medicate. And in 2008, he went off his medication and had an altercation with the police, and the police shot and killed him. And that was really tough. It's equally tough because my dad was a police officer. So we grew up, in a positive, pro-police family. And so to lose my brother to that was really tough. And then to hear afterwards that the gentleman who shot him was bragging about it because he got to play cowboys and Indians. Our family is indigenous, and he felt like he got to, go out and play cowboys and Indians. And that brought the anger out in the grieving process. So when we met for my brother's funeral, my family, we were very stoic. And so nobody cried. Nobody, at the funeral, everybody was just shut off. But I wasn't. I sat there and cried. My mom, after the funeral, was like, "Who was back there crying so loud?" And I was like, "Yeah, that was me." And I felt like I had grieved him properly at that time. I went home, and I was having some heart pounding issues, and I thought my heart was going bad. So I went to the doctor, and I'm like, "Hey, I think my heart's going bad. There's something wrong." And she was like, "Well, explain what's happening." And I said, "Well, my heart's racing. I feel like the world is ending. If I move, it's just terrible." And she's like, "Oh, you're having panic attacks," and prescribed some medication. And I didn't relate the two at the time that I started having panic attacks after my brother was killed. So fast forward to 2020, I'm thinking okay, yeah, I've gotten over it. It's good. And the George Floyd protests started. And that was the first time I saw Indigenous leaders come out and start saying, "Hey, our communities actually have the highest per capita of being killed by the police of any other community out there." And so to see Indigenous leaders out there protesting and saying, "Yeah, Indians are getting killed by the police too, and this happens," I was so mad. I have never felt that kind of rage before. And of course, we're in lockdown, and I was in Ottawa at the time, and all I could do was in the mornings, we were allowed out once a day, and you could go for a walk. And so I would just walk, and I would just rant and rave at my husband, and he would just nod. "Yeah, okay, yep, okay, okay." And up until that time, it was always just a sad story about my brother and this life that he had. And that was the first time I spoke in public about him being killed by the police, and started to acknowledge that trauma and what it did to our family. And I went to a grief group led by one of my spiritual leaders later that year. And I was certain, because in Canada I had cancer, and I was certain I was going to go there and I was going to grieve the loss of my uterus and not being able to have children anymore and all of these things. And I started going through the process, and it was my brother that came up that I was grieving. And I don't remember the name of the workbook, but essentially what they said was that grief is the feeling of wanting more or something to be different. You either want something more or you want something different. That's grief. And I realized all of the more that I wanted with my brother and all of the things that I wished were different. And after that process, it was really difficult. But after that process, I could actually remember. It was like having the blinders lifted off. And I could remember the beautiful things about my brother. I could remember the laugh. When he laughed, he could do a Scooby-Doo laugh. And it was just beautiful and funny and lovely. And I remember seeing pictures of him with his kids. And it was no longer this sad story. It was a beautiful story, and I could see his full life. And so I just wanted to share, that's my experience with grief. It went, many, many years and over time. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think our time is short, so I'll toss back to Karen, but you brought up an important thing, which is the intersection of grief and trauma, which we didn't talk about today, but there are lots of resources out there to address that, because it's kind of its own unique thing about grief. And just one final thought, which is that sometimes people have a sad death, but they are not a sad person. And I love that. I don't know, I think that's from Sarah Ryan, actually. But I think that's helpful to keep in mind, that a lot of times there is a traumatic loss, but that we can still think about the fond memories and the loving parts of that person, even if their life was complicated. So thank you. I'm going to stay here. I have some resources if you're interested. Yeah, I can take one more. Sorry.
Is this on? Okay, so I'm just gonna make a quick note on your concentric circles of grief really quick. Something else with those circles, while everyone has them in mind, is something to watch as a helper of helping people grieve, is you're supposed to vent outwards in that circle. So for instance, like if you're the one that lost a child, your parents and siblings should not be making you comfort them. Mm-hmm. They should comfort you and then vent to their system. Mm-hmm. And eventually it gets out to the church members and the whatever, but nobody should be coming to comfort you and then venting at you about your loss. Mm-hmm. So that's something to remember too, is to just kind of work outwards in that circle when you're helping friends. And I wanted to make 2 really quick notes about like what not to do. One of the things when I lost my daughter that was really, really great and loving was the meal train, but nobody really compared what each other were bringing. And so that glorious 2 weeks of bacon, cheese, butter casseroles was also how I lost my gallbladder, because it triggered an attack. Oh no. So, you know, maybe if the meal train says everyone else is bringing those, bring a salad. But yeah, the only last thing that I really found, I'm just going to share the worst example of anyone who ever helped me. It was this one girl who thought she was doing me a favor by saying, "You're not alone. I have a friend who lost her daughter." And I was like, "Oh, that's so sweet. How did she get through it?" And she looked at me and said, "Oh, she didn't. She killed herself." And I was like, "Why would you say that to me?"
Yeah.
So maybe, you know, keep the not success stories to yourself for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you're still here.
Yeah, that's it.
Be specific about where they can pick up these materials.
Yes, from right here. I'm going to stay right up here, so if you would like to come share your story with me or have some resources, I will be here. Thank you all so much.
Now, clearly, this is an example of where a good dose of time is appropriate for these kinds of issues. We do have some announcements. Yes. What? You want the clicker? Okay. Regarding announcements, there will be a meeting here at 12 o'clock. You can have snacks there, or maybe you've brought your own lunch. The meeting is about DEI in public schools. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you. And there is a lady who's going to be somewhat leading the discussion. So that'll be right up here. At 2 o'clock in the boardroom, which is in there, the End of Life group will have its meeting, which is about every 2 months, thanks to Patrick and Gloria is there. Yes, there she is. And the speaker this time is about an organization called Ars Moriendi, which I guess means the art of the end of life, art of death. Yeah, okay. So that's at 2 o'clock. And then, let's see, we've got a couple of... In a moment, you'll have a chance to share yours. But while we're on the announcements, we need 2 outgoing people to serve as greeters for the 2nd and 5th Sundays. It's a great way to get to know everybody who comes to church. If you're interested, please contact Dick Roop, who will raise his... There he is, right over there. I think that's it for announcements. Yes, All right. So now we're going to have open mic for joys and concerns. We're running over a little bit anyway, for good reasons, but this is a reminder that for joys and concerns, so that we can continue this practice, please keep them short, significant, and personal to you. And so if the greeters have the mics ready to go around, please raise your hand if there's something you'd like. I see one right over here. Maybe if you really wave your hand, they'll see it. Both arms, that should do it. We're getting it.
Hey there, Marsha Wilson from the Pastoral Care Team. I'll be standing right outside with a card for Mike Pitts. His appendix burst, so that's why he's not here today. He's fine, he's just not allowed to lift, so just sign a get well or thinking of you card out there.
Thank you. Oh, and a reminder that if anyone is we still have until this coming weekend to be collecting those snack bars. Okay, great. Get them to you, Jackie? Okay, because then we're going to put little stickers on them that introduce people to our congregation. It's an outreach. I think that's it on announcements. Anybody else who had a brief personal significant?
One more announcement. If you still need July 4th tickets, Jeff, raise your hand, please. He's going to be out in the foyer for $15. We still have plenty. Fill your car up, so it's just $16 a car. We're going to have food trucks, it's going to be glass, and boom.
Just real briefly for anybody online, it was a reminder about the July 4th fireworks that'll be in our parking lot. $15 tickets are still available. They'll have food trucks. You can load up your car. The price is per car. Great. Right, okay. Great way to have fun. I think, any other announcements? Okay. All right then, so let me remind you, we rely on your generous gifts to keep this fellowship going. If you have enjoyed today's service and want to see this fellowship grow and continue to be a positive light in our community, then I encourage you to give generously to support us. There's an offering basket at the back that you can use for your gift as you are gradually working your way out. It's on kind of a pedestal. I invite all those who are able to stand with me. Yes, would you please stand? For those holding private joys or concerns, we invite you to come forward and place a pebble in the bowl of water that is up here at the front of the auditorium, while Steve Walk will again provide some music. Everyone else, please remain in a meditative mood, and our service will conclude very shortly. Yes, on the screen you'll see our words for extinguishing our chalice. Please join in saying these words with me. May we be instruments of peace today. Where there is hatred, where there is injury, let us sow healing. Where there is despair, let us sow hope. May we create the world we want to live in, starting today. Go in peace.